Hi, I'm Ralph and welcome to my kitchen. Today we are talking about something called a tri-tip steak. This is a steak that is very popular out on the West Coast, out there in California. And it is gaining popularity in the rest of the country. Now, it's not always called a tri-tip steak in other parts of the country, but since that's where it's most popular, we're going to be using that term tri-tip steak. And I know here in Texas, occasionally you do find it in restaurants, and it is called a tri-tip steak here. It can be kind of a tough piece of meat, but it can be a very flavorful piece of meat. And so I'm going to show you how we can turn that into a little bit more of a tender delight. Now, first I want to point out, this is what it looks like. Obviously, 3 points to it, hence the name tri-tip. Now it has sort of a fan shape with its grain, so you will have to cut it a little bit differently. The long part down here will all go the same direction, but as it gets up into the main body of the steak, it kind of fans out a little bit. So after you've cut off the kind of tail end of it, so to speak, you may have to change the direction of your cutting to be a little bit more oriented toward this direction. Now I like to season my steak typically anywhere from 45 minutes to up to 24 hours. Normally I don't tend to go 24 hours. Normally I'll go anywhere from 8 to 10 hours maybe. But the longer you give it, generally the more tender you can get the steak, especially if all you're doing is salt and pepper. Now today I'm using a barbecue style rub into it, which also already has the salt and the pepper and a few other things in there like paprika and all mixed in here. But I have had this seasoning for really the last 24 hours, which is really longer than I'd normally like to do it. I'm going to be doing this at a very low and slow. We're going to be doing a reverse sear on this. And I have a couple of tweaks on my reverse sear that most people don't use. So we're going to be going through that as we go along. But as I say, most of the time when I do a reverse sear, maybe on New York strip or ribeye, we're going to be doing that at about 250 to 275 degrees Fahrenheit. Today, since this is a little bit tougher cut of beef than your sirloins, your strips, your ribeyes, I'm going to be doing this at 225 degrees Fahrenheit. Now that's going to take me a little bit longer, I know, but I'm hoping that that's going to give me a little bit more tender cut of beef. Another thing, I'm going to be using a probe thermometer. Today I'm using the meter probe thermometer. Doesn't have to be meter. I tend to really like my meter thermometer, but I've got links for the meter and others down below in the description. It can be wired, it can be wireless, really doesn't matter. They make probe thermometers in a whole range of price ranges, from very expensive to extremely cheap. So if you want to be able to get the internal temperature to an exact temperature, it's kind of hard to beat having a probe thermometer. So I'm going to be putting that into the thickest portion of the steak here. And I always like to check underneath to make sure that it did not come through, and it did not, because nothing like having it come out the other end to kind of screw up your temperature. Now, I'm going to be putting that into the oven. It could take, it's pretty thick cut of beef here, anywhere from 40 minutes to an hour maybe. I'm thinking closer to the 40 than the hour. My app for my meter probe thermometer is going to be telling me the temperatures as it goes along. And I'm going to try to pull this at about 118 to 120. Then we're going to get to the really cool part, the sear. So right now, putting that into the oven, and we'll be back shortly. I'm back. Now I've just pulled the tri-tip steak out of the oven. It's currently reading an internal temperature of 120 degrees. It was 119 when I pulled it out. And so it is continuing to heat up. So here's what I'm going to do next. No, I'm not going to just put it onto the grill. I am going to let it rest for about the next 10 minutes. Now the reason I'm doing that is I purposely want it to cool down. Now take a look at this steak real quick here. You will notice it does not look like it's done anywhere close to being done, and it's not, because it still needs to have the sear put on it. But I want to give the sear plenty of chance to get a terrific sear without overdoing the internal temperature inside. So I'm going to let it rest for about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to put the sear on it. So right now I've got the griddle heating up so it'll be at the right temperature when the meat is ready. So I'm going to give it about 10 minutes to heat up. I'm going to be oiling up the griddle and maybe even oiling up the meat a little bit, putting it on and having plenty of time for the sear to take place. Now, the temperature is going to drop down. Like I say, I want it to drop down because that's going to give me more time for the sear. So I'm going to see y'all in about 10 minutes. I've got the timer set. We'll see you then. Okay, the 10-minute rest period is over. It's time to get cooking. I'm going to go ahead and add a little avocado oil. And I think I'll even add a little bit to the steak itself. Rub it in here. We're going to need some fan. Now the temperature had dropped down to 112 degrees Fahrenheit internal. So that's going to give us plenty of time to get a good sear. Now I'm going to do that for about 30 seconds aside. We're going to keep flipping it till we can get up to about the right temperature, and I'm shooting for about 128 to 130. Now this is a pretty thick piece of meat, so at certain times I'm also going to try to flip it onto its side and get a good sear on the side as well. Time for our first flip. Now I think you can tell here we're getting a pretty decent sear so far. That's after only 30 seconds. You can hear Gunner in the background. He's rather anxious for his sample. And it's time to flip. Let's do it on the edge here a little bit. Okay, we've got about 5 seconds left. I'm showing the internal temperature at 126. Now it is going to continue to cook while it's resting, so I'm going to go ahead and take it off the heat. Turn our heat off. And we're going to give it about another 10 minutes to rest. So I'll see you in about 10. Okay, it has not been a full 10 minutes. But quite frankly, I can't wait anymore. I want to see how this turned out. So let's give it a cut. Now remember, we have to cut with against the grain, and the grain is going to be going a couple of different directions with this. So I think I'm going to go ahead and start out by just kind of cutting that tail portion off. And that kind of shows you what we've got here. Let me take a few cuts off of this. Now this is coming in at about 130 degrees. And remember, when you have a cut that's traditionally known to be a little bit tougher, you want to be cutting this thinner. And this one, as you'll notice, the very edge here, let me show you here, was always much thinner than the bulk of the steak. I didn't cut that off because I'm saving that for Gunner. I'll go ahead and cut that portion off right now. So we'll get a few more portions off of this little piece here. So take a look at what we've got here. That's pretty nicely done. Go ahead and take a bite of this. That's very good flavor. Beautifully done. This is going to make a great steak for just eating it, or sliced and put onto fajitas, sliced, put onto salads. This is a terrific cut. It's much cheaper than your average cut of steak, and it can be a delightful meal. It really can. This is well worth giving it a shot. Treat it a little bit different than you would, say, a strip steak. But if you treat it right, low and slow, give it some rest before you sear it, you're going to get a terrific product out of this. Trust me on this. Now, I've got links down below for various probe thermometers, and I'll have the directions down below. And the links down below, I will get a cut of, but it does not add anything to the price of the items on there. It's mostly for your convenience, but it also does help me make a little bit of extra money. And so, consider giving me a like down below. That helps the channel. Consider a subscription, and I love comments. So please leave me some comments down below. I get some of my best suggestions from my viewers. So please leave me a comment. With that said, I will catch y'all the next time. Bye-bye.